Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I'm your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, and today my special guest is Dr. Arny Ferrando. He's a professor, Department of Geriatrics at University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Great background he has. He graduated West Point in 1978. That was during the Carter administration, which apparently to Arny was one of his favorite administrations. He got his Ph.D. from Florida State in 1991, did a postdoc at NASA Johnson Space Center. He finished that in 1994. Right at the start of the Clinton administration, which, by the way, wasn't so bad looking back. So,
correct.
Anyway, he served as active duty U.S. Army officer, retired lieutenant colonel from the Army Reserve in 2003. And you've done a boatload of work basically on amino acid, muscle protein metabolism, et cetera, et cetera. So, wanted to pick your brain with probably 5 of the most common questions I get. And I figured you'd probably be best at addressing these. Number 1, this is one I get all the time. Essential amino acids versus whole protein. And I know most of the data is on whey, but could you address that, EAAs versus whole protein, whether it's milk-based protein, soy, or a plant-based protein, what happens acutely and what happens maybe over the long haul?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. So I think that you've seen me over the years, and I tell people this, I've become, because of the data and the research, I've become pretty reductionist in my thinking. And what I mean is the human body needs the 9 essential amino acids, so termed because the body can't make them. And with all the work that we've done, now I want to say up front, this is in terms of optimization. Okay, so like, Joe Tenpeg out there living his life, we've been eating protein for thousands of years. Obviously, we live on, it's all good. But you and I are in the field where we think about optimization,
Right.
for performance, optimization for aging, optimization for some sort of pathology, whatever it is. That's been my background. And so in that regard, I've become very reductionist in my thinking. Again, the free-form essential amino acids by themselves are much greater in their anabolic effect. And I point everybody to the paper that my colleague David Church did in Nutrients in 2020, which nicely looked at all that, the effect of peripheral amino acid concentrations from various protein sources, and the effect on whole body and muscle protein synthesis. It's quite clear that the free forms themselves produce a much greater anabolic response because they require no digestion, so there's no GI load or any problem with that. They produce a greater Cmax, in other words, maximal concentration in the blood, and time to Cmax, which I say that because that is the signal for muscle to start its metabolic machinery, start turning over. So in that regard, it's a more optimal approach. Now, would I recommend somebody do nothing but essential amino acids their whole life and no protein? Of course not. But I think that you have to understand that optimally utilize them, because I think your next question was timing, and I can kind of move right into that.
Well, before you get to that, do a dose-by-dose comparison. Let's say it's 20 grams of whey versus what would be the equivalent EAAs.
Yeah, that's the problem, because in whey protein, which is an outstanding protein, obviously an outstanding complete protein, but it only has about 40 to 45% essential amino acids. Okay, so that's a problem in and of itself. So a 20-gram dose, let's say a 40-gram dose of whey is about 15 to 20 grams of essential amino acids. Whereas when you take 15 grams of free-form EAA, you get a maximal response. We've shown that in others pretty clearly. You get a maximal response. So that's part of the issue, number one. Number two is there's no GI load. And why I keep bringing up the GI load is because with older people, if it a discomfort in their stomach or distends their stomach, they're not doing it.
They're done.
They're just not doing it. You can tell them until you're blue in the face, but they're just not doing it. Okay, so that's another reason why over the years kind of became more reductionist in nature, because there's one thing to come up with something that works, but if people don't do it, then you got a problem. Oh, by the way, diet and exercise works well. Why is Ozempic and Glips and everything so popular? You get my drift? It's like nobody does it. Nobody does diet and exercise. So, I think that's part of the problem. And then the other aspect of that is that protein is ureagenic. And so again, it could be a little more problematic in older age when the kidneys aren't operating as efficiently, et cetera. Whereas the essential amino acids free form are non-ureogenic.
Do me a
So
favor and define older age, because I throw the term around a lot. When does old become old?
yeah, now that's a good question, by the way, because again, I'm quick to remind everybody, you and I are in a very small percentage of our society. Like ISSN, for example, like how many zeros are after the decimal point? You know what I'm saying? So in other words, these are people who are lifelong exercisers, understand nutrition, understand exercisers. If you know, at our conference, there's nobody obese in our conference.
Right.
I mean, it's just, they're not there. It's very hard to find somebody overweight, to be honest with you, even who could qualify as overweight. So I think when I define aging, I define physiological aging. I think that's the best way to look at it, not a number, because
Okay.
I'm 68, I still have a 16% body fat. I am still, despite two joints and a third on coming on, still quite functional, et cetera, et cetera. So you can actually be old, I do air quotes, at 40 years of age
Right.
because your physiology has deteriorated, because you're overweight, and then you have tissue inflammation, diabetes. I mean, you get this whole sequelae of events. So everybody likes to, in science, we like to quantify old as, like you said, somebody picked 60. Well, now that we're both over 60, I kind of bristle at that.
Well, well, what's interesting is when I submit these IRB applications and the term older adult is put in there, we are always asked to operationally define it chronologically, like when does older become older? And I just sort of default, I've used the typical age of retirement, which I think is no longer 65. I think it's 67 now or something. It keeps creeping
Well,
because
for Social Security, you're right.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right.
yeah. So it's just arbitrarily, that's what I use. But you're right. There are people in their 40s or 50s who are not quite functional who would classify as, wow, they're not aging well at all. So,
Correct.
but yeah, the
Correct.
people at ISSN are fairly unique. Now, you had started to address the timing issue of essential amino acid supplementation as it relates to exercise. So comment on that.
Yeah, so the reason I was kind of sliding right into it because I think the GI requirement has a lot to do with that. From our work back in Galveston, we clearly showed that the combination of the EA and exercise is interactive. Okay, much more anabolic than either alone. In fact, resistance exercise I always show this slide. I don't know if you remember, like fasting, like net
Mhm.
balance across the muscle tissue fasting. Uh, Resistive exercise is still a negative, and then amino acids alone, but then the two of them together is more than additive. It's interactive. So um, again, I explained this to somebody recently. Is that's because of once you have it's all about delivery to the muscle system, and delivery is concentration times blood flow. So think about it. In that case, you got both of them working for you, right? You take them before the exercise, and then you exercise and blood flow. So now the muscle sees a great deal of the amino acids.
Mhm.
And what can't be actively transported is often mass action into the muscle. Okay. So, so the ideal timing in that regard is like 1 hour before, and we found that up to 1 hour after, it's also effective. Not as effective as 1 hour before, but still anabolic. So let's compare again the free form with the protein. You're probably one of those guys, since you've been taking whey protein your whole life, you can take it before exercise and it's fine. Okay. And I couldn't. That in fairness, Joey, in the early days of the whey protein, you really had to be hardy to take that stuff. I mean,
So it
you
was
really,
nasty. It was
yeah,
nasty.
right, right. Before all the food science got a hold of it, and all the different formulas, and we come a long way, let's face it.
I
But
think the issue I had is the like dairy protein just tastes better than free form amino acids. And that's the only reason, like I'll drink a 40-gram shake of whey. I don't know if I want to drink a 20-gram shake of essential amino acid just because of the
too
taste. So
sweet? Is it too sweet for you?
the essentials?
Yeah.
No, I think I like the sort of the mouthfeel of the milky mouthfeel of
Yeah.
whey.
They
That's
call
fine.
it they call it in food science the organoleptic properties.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like the organoleptic
Yeah,
properties.
yeah, yeah. You're right, but just for myself and others, In the old days when I'd take whey protein before a workout, I would see it again in like 5 minutes. I couldn't keep it down. So that's the advantage again of the essential amino acids. You can drink them before, all throughout, etc. They don't require digestion. They result in no GI load. Some people can handle it, some people can't. Okay.
I'll have
So
to experiment with it. You'll have to send me some, and maybe my wife will experiment with it as well. So see if she likes it.
yeah, yeah, we'll do. Actually, we'll do. So I think, give it a shot because I think that the higher intensity, especially for your wife, when you get up to higher intensities, you're diverting blood flow from away from the GI to the exercising muscle, right? I mean, you
Right.
only got about basically 6 liters of blood to do something within the body. It's a closed loop, so it's going to go to where the need is. So
Yep.
once you take it away from the gut, now you start developing some of those GI issues in terms of.
Now tell a little bit about, people, athletes get injured, maybe they break a bone, so they become inactive, or just maybe the elderly or the older adult, they tend to be sick. There's bed rest is prolonged. Essential amino acid supplementation, maybe versus whole protein, maybe versus creatine. Do any of those, are any of those effective in at least lessening the atrophy or the loss of muscle protein?
Yeah, I think they all are to various degrees. I think they all are.
And
I
how
think
would
the
you compare
data,
the three?
I'm sorry.
How would you compare the three? Creatine, whole protein, and essentials.
I think the data clearly shows that they're all efficacious. Creatine seems to be more long acting in its effects. We're looking at the data. Although I like the fact that, I had a long talk with Darren Candow and Scott Forbes down there because I'm getting ready to submit a protocol with creatine and EAAs combined. Or a grant. And so I was kind of picking their brains on a lot of things. As you know, they've kind of set themselves up as the experts in that area. And what I like is there's so many other benefits that are surfacing with creatine. Everybody
Right.
thought muscle, whole body proteostasis, but now there's benefits to sleep, there's benefits to bone, there's benefits to cognition, even acutely cognition, benefits in Alzheimer's disease. I mean, so obviously there's a lot of important aspects of that. And the brain, I think it's the brain energetics of creatine that really help with cognition, et cetera. But in terms of their acute effects on muscle protein or let me say whole body protein turnover, proteostasis. The free form are what I would put first. They're by far and away the greater effect. Okay. Then I would put the whey protein, for example. And again, this is covered in DC's paper quite nicely. Of course, we didn't look at creatine, but again, creatine, I think, as you know, it has a longitudinal effect. So
Right.
if it was my aunt or mom or dad, I'd do all three. If they were recovering from hip arthroplasty, I'd do all three. And in fact, we've published data on the EAs and hip and knee arthroplasty. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
like you, I take a pragmatic approach, do it all, sort of, it's kind of a shotgun approach, but do it all because they all should help to some extent.
well, that's right. And the first rule of medicine, I'm quick to remind people, right? Do no harm. So
Right.
like obviously amino acids, protein, and creatine, all of them been shown to do no harm whatsoever in everything. So
Now going back earlier conversation we had, because this is something I wasn't aware of, and it was a conversation that stemmed from you speaking with Tony Ricci about some of this extraocular muscle stuff we want to do with creatine, but you had mentioned that essential amino acids do have a cognitive effect, which I was not familiar with that literature. Could you explain to the audience
well,
what?
that's because there is no literature yet. We're working on the paper as we speak. So
Okay.
it's just again data from our laboratory, and again I'll give Kyle Beyer at Ursinus, Dr. Kyle Beyer, credit because he's the one that actually conducted the research. But so we did two studies, and they both were highly efficacious. We tried to tweak the formula the second time, didn't seem to matter. So that data hopefully will be coming out, soon because he's on summer break now, and we run right up the paper. But the bottom line is this: is that our hypothesis was when you look at um, cognition, Joey, you have dopamine and serotonin. They're not the only neurotransmitters, as you know, but they're prime players. And dopamine is formed from tyrosine, phenylalanine, tyrosine, dopamine. Okay, tyrosine, it crosses the blood-brain barrier with the LAT1 transporter and forms neuronally into dopamine. Whereas serotonin, which counteracts the effects of dopamine, is the tryptophan to, 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 to serotonin. Now, the way we approach the formula was, since unlike muscle that has a number of active transporters of amino acids, the brain only has one primary one, which is called LAT1. So the idea was, now there's competition for that LAT1. And we kind of viewed it as a rheostat switch, like most things are in physiology, right? In other words, let's change the ratio such that an emphasis towards phenylalanine, tyrosine, dopamine, and less of an emphasis towards tryptophan, serotonin. And that is exactly what happens, because we measured the blood amino acids and we measured surrogates for dopamine, like HVA, homovenilic acid in the blood, things of that nature. So everything kind of fit together. The cognitive resilience after the psychological stress test, and that was a panel of, like, it's a computer, just like you remember the old like touch dot things that we had when we were younger and
Yep.
all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Well, this is much more uh, elegant than that. So there was four panels, uh, and they were given, like, and this panel would be tracking, so you'd be tracking that little red dot with the mouse. In this panel, they would show you a number of numbers, and then you had to recall them. In this
Hmm.
panel, it was the Stroop test. You know what that is?
Yep.
Like, it
Yep.
says find the red number 6, but it's written in blue. You see what
Right.
I'm saying? So you really have to kind of think
It
it
wrecks you.
through. And then I'm trying to remember what this other one is, but so there's four panels, and so it's like a good 30 minutes of that. It's pretty psychologically
Well, that'll
demanding.
wear you out.
Totally, totally, totally. So they took 20 grams before, 2 and 1 hour before the test, and again, the amino acids were able to mitigate all the decreases, complex and simple reaction time,
Huh.
the
Interesting.
increases. It was able to mitigate the increases in frustration. All those cognitive measures, motivation, frustration, concentration. I mean, all those things. So again.
Could you pare it down to any of the single amino acids primarily?
Well, we used a complete amino acid formula, and so that's a very good question. Would it be just good enough to give tyrosine? Adeucerium, what's his name, man? I apologize to him. I'm blanking on his name. Longtime Eucerium researcher gave a lot of tyrosine, like 6, 7 grams of tyrosine, and during
Gotcha.
cold weather, he found a benefit. But
Hmm.
that's a hell of a lot of tyrosine, which isn't soluble. And so that's another reason why we took this approach. It's just like, okay, we have a complete amino acid formula, and in fairness, don't know like the effects of like the BCAAs in the brain. We haven't gotten
Right.
that far down. Um, I don't know if we ever have to or need to. The good news is we have an essential amino acid form. The way I approach this, Joe, is a twofer. From the DoD standpoint, a pilot standpoint, it's a twofer. I have a formula that maintains proteostasis, and oh, by
Hmm.
the way, now it enhances
That's a
cognition.
win. Yeah.
That's a win-win, right? Yeah.
That's true. That would be the best way to sell it.
Yeah,
So,
it's a twofer. That's exactly right. You
I
get a
mean,
twofer because when sustained operations, proteostasis is a big deal, and the lack of proteostasis leads to cognitive decline. That's been clearly shown in military operations. So again, I have something here that can solve both your problems,
I would
dear.
imagine it would also help under conditions of sleep deprivation, right?
Totally. That's actually the second objective or specific aim of the thing, is during 4 hours of sleep. Being a pilot myself, I can tell you how dramatically your performance is affected by lack of optimal sleep. It's
Yeah.
just very stressful during a military mission in the cockpit. It's not, everybody thinks, well, you're flying. Flying is the last thing you get a chance to think about. That has to be secondary nature. It's like you driving a car and talk. You know what I mean? It's driving the car is a very secondary nature at this point. You have to handle all the radios and the operations and the fires and the guns and other helicopters. It's very difficult. So
Yeah, and well, long haul truckers, I mean, those guys are driving for hours and hours.
yeah, yeah,
I could see it
exactly.
would help them as well.
And to your earlier point, by the way, most people rely on most people rely on uh, even the military relies on stimulants like modafinil and stuff like that. And while that gets you through the acute aspect of the mission, you can't sleep thereafter. So that's where the problems are, right? So when you
Right.
need to sleep, you're still hopped up, you can't sleep, and so you're sleep deprived the second day, no matter how you cut it.
Interesting. Okay, I got one final question for you.
Sure.
This is one that's asked commonly. It deals with mTOR and it's activated obviously by amino acids with leucine as the primary driver, right? But also it's elevated, under conditions of various tumor cell growth or cancer. So reconcile the two because it's a fairly common question.
Yeah, I think people actually don't know the intricacies of that when it's associated with protein turnover. In fact, Bob has given a number of talks on this and clearly showed that movements in the mTOR pathway have very little to do with the muscle protein synthesis. And I think that's because it's a timing thing, right? There's signals. So
Right.
signal doesn't last forever. And the people who got dirty with this will tell you if you're going to try to catch a signal mTOR, you need to do it X amount of time after this intervention. So,
Right.
so I think that's where people go wrong is like oftentimes you've missed that light, and so you end up misinterpreting the aspect of that. I think it's part of the signaling process. And anytime there's protein turnover, that signaling process is inherent in it. So, but I think the misinterpretation comes because the timing is so fleeting. You know what I mean? Whereas muscle protein synthesis, when you think about it, Joey, methodologically, is discerned over a number of hours.
Yeah.
The whole signaling pathway is like 30 minutes here or an hour here. You see what I'm saying? So if you're
Yeah.
not catching that window right, you're not getting that data to interpret. So,
Right.
so I think that's where a lot of the misinterpretation comes from. I
And I
think,
think,
well,
yeah. And
I'm
I think
sorry.
also there's a pragmatic aspect of protein intake that deals with just preventing or alleviating sarcopenia, in combination with resistance training. So I think there's that aspect that people seem to forget when they're talking about mTOR.
Yeah, Roger that. Uh, sometimes Bob often says this, but sometimes I think it's counting angels on the head of a pin. You know, I mean, obviously it has biological significance because it's part of our system, but I think it's one of those areas that we went to in science and threw hundreds of millions of dollars after, and I think we overinterpreted what we have there. Because in all fairness, the gross measures of muscle protein synthesis breakdown balance still hold, right?
Right,
They still hold given intervention A, we know what the uh, protein balance is, both across the muscle and the whole body. That's all that matters. So the rest of it becomes granular. The rest
right.
of it, in my opinion, becomes more like a pharma issue, right? For targets of drug therapy, et cetera. From you and I standpoint, in terms of nutrition and exercise, that's why it just hasn't really, not an area we grossly endeavored into.
Right. One last question unrelated to this about testosterone. And there's an age-related drop in testosterone. Some of the work by Basine back in 96 showed that you can increase muscle cross-sectional area with testosterone without training. In fact, testosterone and enanthate by itself increase muscle cross-sectional area, I think, better than training without testosterone. So what are your thoughts on that vis-a-vis aging? Because I know in Florida, testosterone replacement therapy is something that's fairly common with older men and women, believe it or not.
Yeah, so I don't know if I agree with what you said because training by far and away has a greater effect on cross-sectional area.
Well, I was just
You,
referring to that one study.
yeah, you are right in that taking that over a period of time. As you know, the great thing, Shelley's done a lot of great work, has gotten funded by the NIH a number of times and done longitudinal studies. So clinically, while we did all the initial work in terms of testosterone's effect on metabolism, protein metabolism, Shelley did some really awesome work over the years on the clinical outcomes in use of older
Right,
men, characterizing the what do you call it? Side effects and cardiovascular risk, all the above. He's just done outstanding work on that. So I think that what you have to understand with testosterone is I have these conversations almost daily with people, Joey. It's interesting you bring that up because friends of mine, uh, have been, are at that age now. So the interesting aspect about testosterone clinically is that if you go to the doctor and you do blood work and your total testosterone is 250 or 300, he's not going to say, Joey, we need to put you on TRT until you start complaining, Doc,
Right.
I have A, B, C, D issues. Okay. And so, if it's not, if you're non-symptomatic, like many other things, if you're non-symptomatic, okay. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. I spiked a high PSA. He was telling, and my dad had prostate cancer, so I wanted to follow it
Right.
through. Oh, and the doc was talking, oh, the cancer, 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 and this range and that range. I get the image, nothing at all, clean. So it's prostatitis, right? It's old guy
Right.
swallowing prostate, but I have no symptoms. So there's nothing to do. It's just like at this point, you treat the symptoms. So, it's the same thing in terms of testosterone. If you don't go to the doc and say, Doc, and here's the thing, like guys like you and I would notice that because you're training every day, you're doing something every day, you're out there paddling, you're pushing yourself. The average land squid would not know that. I mean, they're not, their bar is so low that they really don't, they're not pushing the system. You and I push the physiology, so now we will notice when something's amiss. And that's when, that TRT is directive. And
Right.
in the final statement, it's quite efficacious and it can be done quite safely too. And keep in mind, I tell everybody this because you and I hung around the gym in our early years. We saw how testosterone can go awry.
Yeah.
But it's testosterone. The R stands for replacement therapy.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're just putting in exogenously what your body cannot produce endogenously for whatever reason. For me, it was an injury, aging, whatever. Okay. So that's another thing I always tell people that, and you do need to work with a physician and you can get the levels ironed out and you can live on it for many, many, many happy years. So did I help you? I meandered a bit on that, but sorry. Did that help?
No, the meandering helped, so I appreciate it. And that's all I have today. I mean, I appreciate you coming on the show. You're a wealth of information when it comes to amino acids, and maybe I should give it another shot. It's about time I try because I pretty much will try anything. I use my body as a
Well, the other
personal
thing too is
experiment.
I don't know where you stand with your like ideal weight, competitive, performance weight and all, because that has something to do with it as you get older. Even me, I'm still doing combatives and all. It's amazing to me how like a couple pounds dictates speed and everything else for me. I mean, and I'm not exactly competing at a high level. I'm not, Chris Algieri, you know what I mean, or Tony Ricci. So, but I can tell. So I say that because when you take the protein, you're taking in more calories. And you got to think about that. Whereas the free form amino acids are only four calories per gram. So in 15 grams for maximal response, you got 60 calories.
Well, that's why I'm thinking it's worth trying. I feel better at about 180. I'm about 185 now. And I probably feel even better at 170 to 175. The problem is it's
Getting there.
hard for me to get down to 170, 175 now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
unless I really cut back on calories. So, or exercise a lot more, which
All
helps.
right, so let me propose something else to you, which we did not talk about, is that protein turnover is energetically an expensive proposition. So the more you again adjust that rheostat switch to higher protein turnover, the more energy you're utilizing. The flip side of that coin is we found with the menopause transition, that's why women gain weight in the menopause transition because the muscle becomes resistant to effects of amino acids and protein turnover. So let's say protein turnover costs you 500 calories a day, Joey. Okay,
Right.
good general amount. If the muscle becomes resistant and you're no longer spending that 500 calories, where do you think that 500 calories is gone? Okay, and after 7 days, 7 times 500 is 3,500 calories, which is 1 pound. So you see what I'm saying is like this is the way that you adjust the rheostat in that system. So the more you can tweak that system to turnover, the more calories you're using, and over time, it's not going to happen in 1 or 2 days, but consistency will help you lose and maintain that weight.